And if the governors weren't prepared to ask those serious questions and, if necessary, undertake changes in the management of the school, then we'd take over and make those changes for them.
Then it means that my job and the job of the leadership team is very much on the line.
The biggest savings that we can make are through staff, and alarm bells are ringing.
You know, our role as a union would be to defend every job for a teacher in the school.
And the worse it is, and let's say it's £500,000, well, the less precious I think the school can afford to be about where it gets its money from.
You know, you'd expect to play a part in the school as the sponsor.
We just encourage them not to be sold on cheap and tacky advertising.
When a school faces financial difficulties, how particular is its head when seeking sponsors? And how vicious are the cuts? The heads and other professionals at this table can't talk openly about actual incidents for fear of breaking confidentiality. So, they have agreed to discuss an imaginary case set in fictional schools. The moderator is Professor Ted Wragg.
Patrice, you've got a contract for your catering in your school, like 2/3 of the schools in your area, 5-year contract, and it's taken over by a company whose principal business is manufacturing armaments. Are you going to do anything about it?
I wouldn't have anyone taking over my catering company who had some investment in armaments. I would feel very strongly that I wouldn't wish to support arms going to any part of the world. So, albeit I've got a very difficult situation.
5-year contract?
25-year contract wouldn't interest
me.
Break
it?
I wouldn't be interested in 5 minutes. I think it's morally wrong and I wouldn't have them in my school.
OK. Peter, it's your local authority that's got this contract. Are you happy about a head just breaking a contract like that?
Certainly not. I mean, the compensation costs will be enormous. And the school really does then need to think very, very seriously about that.
OK, Rachel, you're a fellow head. Would you live with it?
I think Patrice and I and the other head teachers would have met and we would have gone for a united front on this, facing the issue together. And we would hope that our LEA would support us in resolving the issue amicably.
OK, Frank, as a businessman, do you think they're being a bit priggish about this? I mean...
I'd rather answer that as a person and say I would agree with them in the sense that morally it isn't right. But you could be in a situation where you actually couldn't run the school if you breached the contract and had to pay millions out.
Do you think they're being priggish, Michael?
Well, I think this is a company that's been taken over, so it's quite legitimate to say, well, when the contract's up for renewal, then it's time to renegotiate that contract. The financial cost of doing otherwise might be too great.
OK, Penny, you're a parent governor. Do you think the schools are being a bit priggish? After all, parents just want decent catering. They've made very little fuss.
Yeah, but the parents also want to know that the school isn't getting itself into financial difficulties because it's reneged on a contract for no good reason. And I don't think they should be reneging on their part of the contract because they have a moral argument against the catering company, not when it's going to put the kids' education at risk.
Still not persuaded, Patrice?
No. I don't think we would be at risk because I actually think the LEA would come in to give support and would agree with what we were doing and the school would continue as normal. And I think once it leaked that we unwittingly and unknowingly were supporting some armaments contract somewhere, I think there'd be a great deal of fuss about it.
Peter, are you going to support them?
Half the LEA's pension fund is invested in arms manufacture. Ted, a large part of our shareholdings. No, I mean, Michael's right. The time to review this is when the contract's up for renewal.
OK, now, Rachel, Macbeth Burgers come along to you and say, we will sponsor you. We will give free burgers to your pupils, no more than 2 a term, Macbeth's Burgers, free. For all those children who work hard, who attend regularly.
If Macbeth Burgers wanted to talk to me about giving cash to the school for the school to decide on what it was used, and without the school in any way promoting their product, then I might be interested.
And no burgers?
Well,
The kids are saying, "Miss, that's not fair. We like burgers. What are you doing?"
And we're really interested in rewarding students, but we want to determine what those rewards are, and we want to ensure that they're not going against our healthy schools policy and foodstuffs that will energise students as opposed to send them wild and maybe, detract from their learning.
Patrice, will you have them in your school? A couple of burgers a term, 6 a year maximum? No one will keel over and die.
I'm not keen on the burgers.
Even on Macbeth burgers.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not keen on the burgers, but I'm keen on negotiating with them, because I think if they're prepared to supply us, perhaps with good sports facilities, AstroTurf, a few leather footballs for the girls and boys, and they're genuine about supporting the school, as my colleague has said, I'm not going to turn down good sports equipment or dance equipment from them. They could support us in other ways.
OK, well, unfortunately, you've got a problem, you see, because you're a new head in this school, but the previous head ran up debts of £200,000. So you've inherited a debt. And now on top of that, another £300,000 that is being taken away because of various changes in funding. So you could end up facing a £500,000 deficit. You're still going to be pure about sponsorship?
Yes. We wouldn't enter into any sponsorship where we felt that there was what we thought was immorality, and at the end of the day, we're not going to sell our soul completely.
£500,000 debt, scorning a fair amount of sponsorship because it's a bit dodgy. How about your contract now on the meals with the arms manufacturer? Reviewing that at all?
No.
£500,000 debt?
No.
Going to have to make some very tough decisions before long. Peter's twitching in the wings, aren't you? Big debts and a bit sniffy about sponsorship?
If the deficit was that large and it was clear that the management of the school were not really serious about addressing the issues, then we'd be having some very serious conversations with the governors about all of that. And we'd be expecting the school not just to examine how to cut its expenditure, but we would indeed be expecting the school to examine alternative ways of raising income.
Now, Patrice, you want to be a specialist school. That means you've got to raise £50,000. Can I have vending machines in? Could raise quite a bit of money.
Yes, vending machines could raise some money for the school.
OK, how about fizzy drinks?
I wouldn't be against fizzy drinks, because my experience tells me that if you only get other kinds of drinks, pupils buy them somewhere else anyway.
Rot their teeth?
On the way to school, yes.
Obesity problems? Hyperactivity?
Yeah, I mean, let's wait and see. I mean, I'm not sure all the evidence actually proves that at all, actually. And I think probably the kids might buy them anyway.
You're going to have a fizzy drinks machine? A cola machine?
I would like
Fizz.
Like Patrice, I know how much money vending machines bring into schools, and I'm also a realist, and I know students can get hold of foodstuffs that aren't good for them outside of school, and they'll bring them into school if that's what they want to eat, and if they haven't been educated not to want to eat that type of food. So I think the answer lies in health education.
Big logo on the machine?
Well, I think all vending machines have big logos on and
drink lots and lots of our fizzy drinks.
To buy them. But
the
that's
more
exactly
the merrier.
The same as at every newsagents and food store.
Drink them at home, pester your parents for them.
And part of what we're doing in schools is educating students to be wise about advertising and about the media and to make informed decisions. So you have a fizzy drinks machine and
say don't buy it?
We just encourage them not to be sold on cheap and tacky advertising.
Now, Frank, you used to work in advertising. What are these advertisers up to in schools?
Well, they're trying to reach their target market, whether it's adults or kids, to try and sell their products. That's what they're mainly up to. There are a few who have more philanthropic reasons, but many of the big companies practice what they call cause relationship marketing, which is to because they can't reach their consumers particularly well, perhaps through television as easy as they used to. They think about, well, what cause could we sponsor that would influence people and make them think we're doing good, and that way they'll think well of us and buy our product. So it's not quite as simple as just plain sponsorship.
So it's a sneaky little body of people down in the basement somewhere working all this out?
No, I don't think they're in the basement. I think they're probably quite high up, but I think it's a little bit cynical, yes. I think they know what they're doing.
Julie, you're a union representative. Do you have any unease about your members being expected to accept certain kinds of sponsored goods and services and so on?
I would expect teachers to be very uneasy about this sort of thing. In my experience, this is exactly the sort of issue that you could mobilise teachers and parents, the community, the LEA.
Penny, as a parent governor, are you concerned about sponsorship? I mean, are you happy that various things with logos on might be sold in your school?
I'm concerned about sponsorship, but I'm even more concerned about the financial situation of the school. And the worse it is, and let's say it's £500,000, well, the less precious I think the school can afford to be about where it gets its money from.
OK. Michael, you've been appointed to set up a city academy, and you're looking for a sponsor who'll cough up a fair amount of money. You discover there's £2 million on offer from a Christian organisation. You've got 60% of likely intake is going to be Muslim. Is that okay?
It's okay as long as that Christian organisation doesn't want to impose its particular views upon the curriculum and ethos of the school.
So if it's wanting, say, a predominantly Christian atmosphere in the school, would that be a step too far?
It would be a step too far, and it needs to be pointed out that the population of the school is of a particular nature, and that to do this would actually be counterproductive.
If the sponsor says, actually, I'm a pretty fundamentalist creationist and I'd really like that slant in the school.
I would say no, this is a school with a very multiracial population, a multi-faith area. To do that would cause more offence than is required.
What say do you expect the sponsor to have? I mean, a sponsor comes along and says, I'll give you £2 million. Is that the end of it? Do you get twitchy if the sponsor says, however, I'd like to make 1 or 2 points? Or do you think, fair enough, you've put up £2 million, you make your points?
Well, the points I would like that sponsor to make is how are we going to raise attainment for children in this school? How are we going to make life better for them? How are we going to turn failure into success? And engage in a dialogue with me, the other governors and the staff and the school community. But to try and impose his or her will upon the school in a particular direction would be wrong without consultation, dialogue and a consensus being reached.
Suppose the sponsor wants to have a certain number of governor place nominations. Is that all right?
They can do at the moment, I believe.
So you'd say that's fine?
That's fine.
So I can nominate my creationist friends?
There's nothing to stop that person doing that sort of thing at the moment.
And you'll go along for the £2 million and the 28 million from the government?
As long as the sponsor and the trustees don't attempt to impose their will in that particular area upon the policies of the school.
Frank, if you succumb to Michael's charms and were to cough up a sizable sum of money for him, would you expect anything in return, or would you just say, I'm philanthropical, here you are?
You know, you'd expect to play a part in a school as the sponsor.
Would your own philosophy play a part here, whether it's religious or not?
Yes.
I mean, if you happen to have beliefs about life, about society,
yes,
would you say, as a sponsor, I'd like to see these taken on board?
I would say, as a sponsor, I think we should consider these very carefully, and if presuming they're sensible and my philosophies aren't balmy, then I would expect to have them taken on board. One's approach perhaps to the importance of the arts or the importance of sport or the importance of how religions mix together and work together. Yeah, I'd expect to be listened to.
That okay, Michael? You'll go along with that?
I don't think that's any different from the organisation and the governance of most schools. Most chairs of governors, most governors have views about education.
But they're not coughing
up
£2 million, are they?
No, they can't. No, they don't offer £2 million. But nevertheless, everyone who sits on a governing board usually has a view about education and is prepared to express them.
OK, now, we've got to get back to your debts, I'm afraid. You were probably hoping they'd gone away, but they haven't. And £500,000 is a lot of money. Michael, you're a superhead who can give advice to Patrice and to Rachel. So what are you going to say to them?
I think the first thing I would say is, how did he get into that position in the first place?
Previous heads, no problem, gone now. Well, it's a £200,000 of bad debt, and another 300,000 slashed off the budget, so it's 500,000. So it's not going to be saved by using envelopes twice and switching off the lights. In fact, it's probably got to make big inroads into the staffing budget. Alarm bells ringing?
No, I think that's probably what the school's got to do.
So it's just matter of fact?
Yes, I think if that level of debt, you need to review your staffing establishment. And that could mean redundancies, it could mean redeployment, and anything that the head decides to do has to go in front of the governors and has to go probably in front of the LEA. OK, Patrice, you may have to lose staff. Sounds if you will have to lose staff if, say, 80% or so of your budget is staffing anyway. What are you going to do?
Well, that assumes the LEA has given up on us and they're not prepared to bail us out or not come part way.
Well, we'll ask them in a moment.
If that's the case, the biggest savings that we can make are through staff, and alarm bells are ringing as to what that means. And we, the senior team and governors, would look at, is there any possibility where money could be saved on staffing through voluntary redundancy or ways to bring money back into the school in a way that was properly negotiated and sensitively handled.
Classroom assistants are a lot cheaper than teachers. You're going to bring in a few classroom assistants and get rid of a few teachers?
I wouldn't have the classroom teachers going in and classroom assistants arriving just like that, because I don't think that would be the right thing to do.
But would you make greater use of classroom assistants and interactive technology, for example?
Yeah, I was going to say that I've actually seen some excellent classroom assistants who I would kill to keep, and I've seen technology.
Teach a class on their own?
I haven't seen a classroom assistant teach a class on his or her own. I've seen some very, very good classroom assistants, and I've seen some very good use of technology where the class being taught has not suffered as a result of having a classroom teacher or someone who knows how to use a whiteboard properly. I've seen some very good learning.
Rachel, what are you going to do?
What I would want to ensure, first of all, is that I'm generating all the revenue I possibly can before I look at losing teachers. I'd want us also to look at whether there was possibility for staff sharing between schools. I'd be looking with my governors and with my colleague heads at any possibility of keeping good staff and avoiding redundancies, whilst obviously generating the money that we need and making savings so that we could get over our budget deficit.
Tempted to keep with the arms manufacturer's catering contract by any chance?
I think we made that decision and it was the right decision to make, and we have to look forward.
So goodbye 10 teachers.
I hope very much it wouldn't come to that.
But it will. You've got to save £500,000. Can't do that without losing at least 10 teachers.
But redundancy also is very costly, and in terms of the emotional strain on the school, very costly. I wouldn't give up until I looked at every single budget heading and any way of saving. I'd want to look at whether we could minimise the amount of cover that was generated and reduce our supply bill. And I think that once you start looking at losing significant numbers of teachers, you are running the risk that the education of the children at the school will suffer.
Macbeth burgers could double the amount available.
Macbeth burgers are very tasty, yeah.
So they're tastier now, are they?
They're a lot tastier now, yeah.
But the arms manufacturer's out.
The arms manufacturer's
He just makes a little bit of napalm and the odd cruise missile. He's not a big, player. Julie, your members not happy about this.
Well,
double figures could be going.
The first thing I'd say about this is that redundancy is a kind of legal process, and there are steps to be gone through, and one of the first steps in that is that you'd open all of this up. You'd have to open the books and the staffing structure open to the LEA and the unions. We'd expect to have a redeployment policy in place, a redundancy agreement, and the first thing you would do would be probably to, if you reach that point, to call for voluntary redundancy. Now, it happens that as a teacher, the only way that you can actually retire early is by being made redundant between 50 and 60. So quite often, the only way you can get out before 60 is by being made redundant.
So they're queuing up?
Well, quite often you find that if you do make a call for voluntary redundancy, you've got to...
You're killed in the rush?
...stand aside from the door, or you'll be stamped flat, yes.
So actually, as a union officer, you're saying hooray.
No, what we are saying is it would have to be a managed process, but the first step of it, we'd have to look through the books and check whether it really needed to happen. And our role as a union would be to defend every job for a teacher in the school.
Would you be happy about greater use of classroom assistants and new technology?
No, we believe that every class should have a qualified teacher in front of it.
So what are you going to do if a school says, goodbye 10 teachers, hello 10 classroom assistants?
Well, by that stage we'd be negotiating fairly intensely on behalf of individual members.
But you lost.
Pretty good picture of the people
you
who
lost in the
actually
face
would like
of
to go.
£500,000 minus.
Well, I suspect that redeployment and voluntary redundancy would solve the 10 teacher issue, but we'd have to look at the books very closely and work with the school and the LEA to avoid redundancy.
If a school goes gung-ho for classroom assistants and new technology, would you consider balloting your members?
Yes.
Balloting them for what?
Well, industrial action.
Of what kind?
Strike action.
So they would withdraw their labour?
Yes.
Completely?
Yes.
Walk out of the school?
Well, if the members support the action, yes.
They would walk
But
out of the
teachers feel
school.
very strongly that they do a job that can't be replicated by a classroom assistant. And that job is the teaching of classes.
Oh dear, Bill, you're the bursar. Do you have any thoughts on the level of employee, the level of salary?
I think you've got to start first by developing some form of strategic financial plan which is going to run over the next 3 to 5 years. If there's got to be a reduction in staff, then you've got to look at all staff. It may not just be teaching staff, it may be on the support staff as well. And you've got to look at those scenarios.
Don't save much money there, though, do you, compared with teachers at the top of the scale?
It's not a case of that. I mean, the head teacher may not be happy about losing 10 teachers. That may not be the way forward, but it may be a case of you've got to get a balance between the teaching staff and the support staff. You've got to see exactly which way is the best way forward for the school.
Even if the head says we'll do without a bursar?
Well, that's happened before. You
wouldn't be off to the bursars' union?
We don't have a union, actually. But no, if the bursar had to go, the bursar had to go. I mean, you've got to look over 3 to 5 years and see what the next 3 to 5 years is actually going to produce, whether it's going to turn that deficit round without making such drastic cuts.
Now, Peter, the heads have wondered from time to time whether the LEA would do anything. If you've got a couple of schools with a £500,000 deficit and the heads are trying hard to do something, are you going to be in there pitching, or are you going to say it's you and your governors, folks?
No, I mean, we'd be doing a number of things, Ted. I mean, the first thing we'd want to do is to look at what those schools that are in deficit are spending their money on compared to other schools of similar size elsewhere in the authority. You know, what is it about that school's spending profile that is so very different? Because that will help you put your finger on what's gone wrong and maybe how you would need to start putting it right. But we would also then be looking at whether there were ways, as Bill was saying, of supporting a 3 or 5 year recovery programme, you know, to try to soften the landing for the school.
Who'd draw that up? You with the school or the school with you?
We'd draw it up jointly. I mean, if we were going to allow the school to run a licence deficit for a period of years, we would have to be confident that the proposals in there were realistic, that they were going to get the school back to where it needed to be, and so therefore we would need to be involved in drawing it up and signing it off.
Are you effectively taking it over then? Are you the official receiver, so to speak?
We'd only want to do that where it was clear that the head and the governors were absolutely determined not to do anything about the situation they were facing. If they were saying to us, well, it's only £500,000, it's only money, what do we do?
No, it's the last lot who did it and they've gone now. Could you let a school go bankrupt?
If that was what was happening, we would intervene at that point and say to the governors that they really ought to be asking some very serious questions of the management of the school. And if the governors weren't prepared to ask those serious questions and, if necessary, undertake changes in the management of the school, then we'd take over and make those changes for them.
Michael, as head of an academy, are you in a very different position if you get into financial difficulties? After all, you haven't got Peter and the LEA to work with you.
No, we've got to keep within our budget.
So if
That's
you're
part of the funding
$500,000 in debt,
we're an independent institution within the public sector, so we're definitely on our own. And if we don't get it right and account for the budget properly, then it means that my job and the job of the leadership team is very much on the line.
so if you come into an academy new and it was the previous regime that ran up the debt, what are you going to do then?
Well, I'd have to find out why that happened and look at strategies to improve the situation.
And in terms of getting rid of teachers?
That might
You
be
would just say
that
that's
might
life.
be an option that faces us.
And would you get rid of the more expensive teachers if that were expedient?
I'd want to keep good teachers in the school because
Even if they're
good
costly?
teachers make the difference between success and failure. And if you lose good teachers, then there's a downward spiral. So you'd want to keep good staff within your school and explore the opportunities that non-teaching staff can bring.
Frank, as a sponsor and benefactor of schools, would you rush in and bail the school out?
No.
Would you reach in your pocket and write a nice little cheque?
Another check. No, and I think it wouldn't be a question of bailing out. I think the first thing is the principal would be out, because if they perpetuated a debt, then that would be where you would look to, the principal and the finance director, and because they have the responsibility for running the school on a budget. And I think that's the first place you'd start.
OK, well, let's bring this to a close. One day, Patrice, there's a knock at your door, and it's a former pupil who comes back and says, "Miss, I've heard that we're deeply in debt. £500,000, this is terrible. But the good news, miss, is I've made millions and I can bail you out. And I can give you a cheque now for your £500,000 deficit. And I'll tell you what, whilst I'm here, have another £500,000 to sort of, you know, build up a few things, get a bit of football kit for the kids, all these things you don't want to take sponsorship for. By the way, I made all my money out of armaments manufacture. Are you going to accept it?"
No.
You're still going to be pure,
I'm going to take money from other sources.
but not from the armaments manufacturer.
Not from the armaments manufacturer, no. It goes against the values of what our school believes in. And I think we would pay a very high price ultimately if we did that.
So you will drown in a welter of glory. Thank you very much.